Hey everybody, and welcome to the third episode of Ask the Chairman. This is a board game related Q&A session where you guys can ask me anything. So thank you to everybody who left questions on the last video, and as always, if you have any questions for me, then please leave them in the comments in this video and I'll be sure to answer them next time. Without questions, I cannot continue with the series. Before I get started on the Q&A session, be sure to check out KIENDA.co.uk. As always, my favourite board game online retailer, and obviously if you use the link in the show notes or the QR code that I'll leave beside me, then you can get 5% off your first order. But let's get started on the questions, and we're going to start with a question by Jeffrey, and he's asked, what 5 to 10 games will never leave your collection? I kind of never say never, I suppose. You never know, one day there might be an El Grande version 2 that's even better than the original, but going off the information that I know now, of course my favourite games of all time, games like El Grande would never leave. Hanamakoji is one that I have some sentimental value to because it's a game I play with my mum a lot. Games like Chinatown, For Sale, one that I've had forever in my collection, and even rarer games like St. Petersburg, games like Tifa Taschen, almost impossible to get hold of now, so of course that's going to make it a lot stronger for me to want to keep them. Bradley has asked, how important is diversity in a collection? Do you stick to a particular mechanism or go for a lot of different ones? So I would say this is probably one of the most important things that I consider when kind of curating my collection. I like having tons of different mechanisms for tons of different occasions, player counts, types of players, all these different things. And this is one of the reasons why sometimes I get comments on my cull videos saying, why have you culled this game when you said it was so good? And I still think it's an excellent game, but I have games that are somewhat similar to it. And rather than having two very solid and great games of a particular type, I would rather have two different games, even if one of them wasn't as good as the game that was similar to the original, if that makes sense. So I'd much rather have a breadth of games, tons of different types, tons of different occasions, than having a bunch of similar ones. I don't want 10 different worker placement games that are very similar. I want variety. Emmanuel has asked, what is the oldest game you own and what do you like about it? So I'm assuming you mean in terms of its design, and if we're talking in that respect, then the oldest game I own is Acquire, that dates back to the 1960s, a Sid Saxon game. I like everything about Acquire. It's a very simple economic game, but I like how dynamic it is. The board state is always changing as bigger companies are absorbing smaller companies, and I really like the contrast of having cash flow in the game, making sure you have enough money to make future investments, as well as going for that end game kind of majority shareholder scoring as well. So yeah, that's the oldest game in my collection. Emmanuel, Acquire. He's also asked, what is your favourite box size? So I actually love the kind of coffin-sized Euro game boxes that game companies like Alea put out there. They're kind of slightly taller than they are wide. I think they look really good when they're on the shelf. So these are my favourites. Lionel has asked, do you give games another chance after a bad initial impression? Generally speaking, I do, but it does depend on how long the games are. If a game's 3 hours and I didn't like it the first time, there's a very slim chance that I'll sit through that again if I know I'm pretty much not going to like it. If I know categorically I don't like something, I probably am not going to give it another chance. But if I'm on the fence and maybe I was, thought that there's some promise here, the chances are I'll give it another go and go into it with an open mind. He's also asked, if that is the case, which games have you reconsidered lately? So there are a couple of games that I didn't personally buy but that my brother has added to our collection. Games like Theurgy, and I've also written Beast down here. Now these are games that I don't think are objectively bad, but they're just not my style, and maybe they weren't exactly what I was expecting the first time. So maybe now that I know what I'm getting into, I might enjoy it a bit more. So I'll definitely be up for playing those again and giving them another shot. Lionel was also asked, have you tried all of the Chronicles in Glenmore 2? No, I haven't. I've only tried, I think, 3 or 4 of them, and I think the last 2 or 3 times that I've played the game, I haven't used any of the modules at all. So I know Mackenzie and Franklin from Side Game really recommended one of the modules to me. So I still need to make sure to prioritise trying that one. I think that's the new location cards. So an easy introduction, and hopefully I'll get that one tried the next time I play Glenmore, because it is due for a play soon. And staying on the topic of Glenmore 2, he's asked, have you tried the Glenmore 2 expansion? No, I haven't. I've not even tried the Chronicles from the base game yet. And expansions are becoming less inviting to me. I'm not really that interested in trying too many expansions because, I just find it makes games too bloated. And again, Glenmore 2's got loads in their box anyway. I've had it for years, I've still not tried it all. I still love the game as it is, so maybe adding more is going to be a deterrent rather than helping me get it to the table. He's also asked, what are my top 3 abstract games? So I've actually written 4 down here, and I know the definition of an abstract strategy game is fairly loose, but for me, these games would fit in that category. The games I've written down are Arcadia by Rudiger Dawn. A very cool polyomino style game. Very interesting. Recommended to me by one of my subscribers, actually. Also Samurai by Rainer Knizia. Tile placement area control game. Also I've written down Babylonia and Mexica as well. For me, Mexica is a cut and dry abstract strategy game. Area control, erecting these pyramids all over the board. Very cool game. But generally speaking, I don't like abstract strategy games. I find them a bit too rigid and just a bit dry. Tony has asked, do you allow snacks and drinks when your games are being played? Yes, I do, but generally speaking, my game groups don't play or don't eat when we're playing, because we normally play in the evening after we've had dinner and stuff. So drinks, no issues at all. And I've got no issue with food either, as long as you're respectful and you don't obviously damage or soil my games. He's also asked, how often do I sleeve cards? Very rarely. I very rarely sleeve my games. The only ones that I would definitely sleeve are if I have, say, hidden role games, these social deduction style games. I'll always be sure to sleeve those ones, because scuffs and nicks in the cards can give things away and completely ruin the game if people clock onto these things. But I may look at sleeving at some of my favourite games and my more valuable games. I probably should do that, really. But I'm not a big sleever. I've never really felt the need to. And I don't play the same games tons and tons to wear the cards out. So generally all my games are in good condition, despite me not sleeving them. And he's asked, do you ever discard boxes or inserts? Yes, I do. Very recently I've gotten rid of dozens and dozens of inserts. I'm definitely a bagger. I like getting rid of an insert, putting everything in snap bags and setting up that way. And with boxes and stuff, if I can absorb games into a single box, then I will. If I don't like having loose expansion boxes out there, and if I have, say, 2 games of a similar type, like for example, I've got Mysterium and I've got Detective Club, I've got them both in the same box because we can use the same components for both games, and we don't need to have, we want to keep as small of a collection we can in terms of its physical space it's taking up. Mike has asked, what are your 2 most memorable game experiences? I'll give you 3 here. So these are just things that sprung to my mind. The first of which was when we played a game called Room 25. Now this is a game I did not like at all, but it's a kind of a hidden role game as you're navigating around this shifting maze. We have all these different rooms. I played this with somebody who had just started introducing games to, one of my best friends, and we ended up, I think I was the traitor, and I got to a point where I could have put, because there's an action in this game where you can push people into rooms blindly and hopefully try to kill them. I did that thinking I could find my exit, but I pushed them into a room and it ended up being safe. And then I had to explain why I pushed him into that room. And I somehow managed to convince him that I was still on his side, even though I just basically tried to kill him. And my excuse was that I tried to get him to safety faster. And for some reason he bought it and still turned on another player, despite me already showing my treachery. So that was some good diplomacy there on my part. Also, just things like playing telestrations with all my friends at Christmas time. Had some great moments of just crying with laughter and playing telestrations. And another distinct memory was when we were playing Love Letter. I think we were playing multiple players, and I came home from work or something quite late, and I joined in, and one player already had like say 4 crystals, and we were playing until somebody got 5, and I ended up winning 5 crystals in a row. So even though I joined late, I ended up winning 5 hands in a row and winning the game. So that was quite funny as well. And also he's asked, is there a game that you would change one rule to improve it? I'm sure there are tons of them, but one that springs to mind is the mandatory quests in Lords of Waterdeep. I really hate that mandatory quest rule where you can force players to have to complete a mission before they do anything else. It feels like I don't know, there's no real rhyme or reason why you do it. I suppose it's a catch-up mechanism, but usually it ends up being used on people who aren't even winning, and it's just very frustrating, and I don't like it. And his final question is, what games have you regretted selling? So regret, quite a strong word, but these are ones that I would maybe have some second thoughts on. Mombasa was a game I really liked. I did cull it from my collection because I think Maracaibo was a bit too similar. Vasco da Gama, a game that I did get back actually and then sold it again, so maybe I don't regret that one anymore because I've sold it twice. Gentes, one of the best games that I've culled. Suro is a game that I've wanted to get back to the table because it's so easy to introduce. And also Lancaster. So Lancaster, again, another one of my favourite games that I don't have in my own collection anymore, and probably one of the strongest examples of the game I want there to be a second edition and re-implemented rules to streamline some things. And another one was Ra. You know, Ra I did sell from my collection. I ended up reacquiring it, and now it's one of my favourite games. So that's one that I did regret selling, but obviously I have it now, so I no longer regret it. Ziv has asked, what are some accessible Euro games that I enjoy? Now again, there are a ton of them, but I've listed a few here. Ra being one of them. Istanbul's a great one, a little kind of a navigation, kind of a moving working placement game where you're racing to get some gems. Peloponnese, another gate bidding and kind of disaster aversion game. St. Petersburg, a nice little tableau builder. And Kraftwagen as well. Very accessible games. They have some depth and just a very smooth and nice games. Hairy Gnome has asked, do I narrate my moves and does it annoy you? It doesn't annoy me. I don't mind it at all. People just being transparent about what they're doing. And kind of thinking, you know, self-reflecting, I think I might narrate my rules more than I realise. Again, it doesn't bother me. I'm just doing it just to tell people what I'm doing, what I'm talking through. And it's something I make a clear point of doing if I am teaching the game to, you know, new players, or if I'm more experienced with a game than other players are, because, you know, for me, there's nothing worse than people doing things and, you know, trying to pull the wool over their eyes. So I'm always crystal clear that, you know, if I'm building up towards something, I'll let them know, look, you need to stop me doing this, because if I do this, then I'm probably going to win the game. So I'm always very open about things like that. So yeah, I think it's good at teaching the game, especially for first timers, and it's also another thing to reinforce that people are learning the game correctly, because if they say things like, well, I would have done what you've done, then that's just a great reason why you should narrate your rules, and it shows that the rules are resonating with them. T-Ball has asked, what are my thoughts on Kickstarter culture? I don't have strong thoughts on it. I know it's a kind of a controversial topic, because all the games that I have, and most of my favourite games and my style of games, aren't normally on crowdfunding. I like most older games that have been straight to retail. And to be honest, I found myself going on Kickstarter and GameFound less and less often. You know, they're becoming extremely expensive and overly produced, all these style of things, which I'm not really interested in. But I know it's a huge part of the hobby. You know, some channels are basically fully focused on Kickstarter, and, you know, I'm the exception here. You know, I know that this is, when people think of board games, especially people who are well in the hobby, it's all about what's the new Kickstarter, what's the new huge campaign game. And I have no idea how people are playing these games. You know, they're massive, they take up so much space, they take up so much time, they're super expensive, and I don't know how people are playing them, how people are affording them. It's beyond me. And so yeah, I think it's just a part of the hobby that I'm kind of just ignore and don't really dip dive too deep into, because I can just dismiss the kind of games that are big on Kickstarter anyway, and I'm here playing my old school Euros. But hey, that's what I do, and so, you know, if you're into that kind of thing, fair enough, but it's just not quite for me. And he's also asked, what are my thoughts on deluxifying games? Again, I'm not against it. I quite like the concept, especially if it is a well-established, you know, evergreen classic. You know, I'd love a deluxe version of some of my favourite games. You know, if you can make a deluxe version of El Grande, I'll be all over it, because it's a wonderful game. But I do feel like the bar for deluxifying a game is so low at the moment. Like, even games that are completely untested are coming out with extremely lavish components, which are obviously increasing the prices dramatically. And it's like, this game might not even be good. It might look amazing, but the gameplay is completely untested, and it's probably going to get forgotten about in a year. Whereas if you deluxified something like Concordia, then you know that people are going to play it. So I think the threshold and the bar needs to be raised about what is being deluxified. But, you know, to summarise, I'm not against it at all. It's really nice to have a nice tactile, visually appealing game in front of you. And he's also asked, what is my interest in train games such as 18xx and Age of Steam? I have next to no interest. I've played kind of 18xx adjacent games. For example, I played City of the Big Shoulders last year. I did not like it at all. I like economic games to be a little bit simpler. These were just overwrought, too long and too complex for me personally. He's also asked, have I ever been recognised? No, I haven't. At least not for being in board game content creation. Dan has asked, what are my top 3 favourite Vladimir Suki games? My favourites are Praga, Caput Rendi, one of my top 10 favourite games of all time, Pulsar 2849, and Underwater Cities. But generally speaking, I love Suki games. I love Wardcraft. I like Glass Will. And I'm sure there are some other ones as well that I've forgotten about. Trinity has asked, what was the game that first got me interested in the hobby? So the first game that got me really invested was Legendary, the Marvel deck building game. So growing up, I was a huge Marvel fan, before Disney got hold of it, of course. And I really loved Marvel. So this was just like, I wanted to try the game. I ended up really enjoying it. I'd never played cooperative games before. I ended up playing it with my game group probably 100 times. It was kind of the only game we had amongst us, and we played it every single week. But and then that kind of led naturally into other board games such as Carcassonne, such as The Resistance. And it was just a natural progression to getting heavier games. And I was well and truly invested by that time. But yeah, Legendary was my first game in my modern collection. Let's go on to the next questions there. So Matt and Music for All, so 2 people have asked the same question here. So have you considered designing your own games? Yes, I have. Funny enough, the games that I tend to think of are not the kind of games that I play myself, because I think that's why I like kind of heavy Euro games, because I know that I would never be capable of designing something like it. So I find it quite fascinating and interesting to dissect and see how these people thought of such things. But I've got 2 designs kind of in the work, maybe 3. The first of which is like a poker style game with powers, which I'm quite happy with. It does need some fine tuning. And another one was kind of like an economic party game, which I was quite happy with, but now thinking about it, I don't think it's quite strong enough to be ready to be published or be released, I suppose. So if I had more time and more hours in the day, I would develop these games more, but sadly I don't. But I do think I've got it in me. I think I've got a game or 2 in me to put out there, and I'm sure one day when I have that time and desire, I will get them released out there. But yeah, it's something that's definitely on my radar. I just need to prioritise it amongst other things. Pessiferous Joe has asked, what mechanism would I like to see more of? A difficult one, really. I can't really put my finger on an exact mechanism. Maybe, I don't know, I tend to really like this kind of incentive building thing where, you know, the longer you neglect things, the better it becomes. Things like No Thanks. It's just something I really enjoy about that, and I've never really played many games that I don't like that mechanism in. So maybe that's an answer for you. He's asked, where do you see board games in 10 years' time, in terms of trends and things like that? So I think there'll be fewer games being released in 10 years' time, as there is now. And I also think that the kind of subject matters and things will start getting a bit more adult, because at the moment we're in a very kind of sterile environment where everything just offends everybody. So every theme of a game has to be wildlife, it has to be trees and flowers. And I think eventually it's going to steer back the other way, where games will start becoming more violent again, more adult themes, these kind of things. It's not particularly my cup of tea, but I can just see it steering that way. These kind of things are quite cyclical, where the needle goes one way and then it goes the other way, back and forth and back and forth. So maybe in 10 years' time, it will start becoming more, again, a bit more adult themes, more violence, more graphic, kind of grown-up themes, I suppose. And he's also asked, have you ever quit a game midway through? Yes, a couple of times, mostly because of colourblind issues. So I distinctly remember me and my brother, both very badly colourblind. We played a game of Yamatai. We couldn't finish it. The colours were too blurry to us, and we couldn't work out what was what, and the game was pretty much unplayable. Another one was Court of the Dead, which is kind of a big area control drafting game. Just couldn't finish it. It went on too long. And he's also asked, have you ever lost out to a crowdfunding project because it did not deliver? Kind of. I remember a couple of years ago, The Bank, which is a great game, was being relaunched, deluxeified version, and it didn't successfully reach its target, which was a huge surprise to me. But fortunately enough, the company still published the game with some alterations. So it was kind of like the project didn't fund, but they released it anyway. So in a way, I did miss out on the project, but the game came out anyway, so I didn't really miss out overall. So that's the only example I can give, really. But thank you for the questions. Sacco has asked, has the golden age of mechanisms passed? My gut reaction says yes, it has. It seems like all the games coming out now are, rather than being new things, are a hybrid and maybe a refinement of existing games. So, instead of having a new mechanism introduced like worker placement was or deck building was, there's nothing like that anymore. There's just worker placement deck building games. And so it really is a mishmash and cherry picking little bits and the best bits of different games to put into a new game, which, it's a natural progression, but it would be nice to see some innovativeness, or innovation. But I'm surprised, I wouldn't be surprised if we're not going to see that for some time. Hence why, with Joe's question earlier, what the trend is going to be. It's going to be fewer games being released because there's just not the ideas out there, and there's a lot of copy and pasting, rinsing and repeating going out there at the moment, when, for me, the patterns are showing that games that came out 10, 15 years ago are normally stronger than a lot of the games coming out now, even though they've been directly inspired by them. So I think the golden age of mechanisms may have passed. He's also asked, what do I think of expansions? I love more of the same expansions. If I can completely just take an expansion, shuffle it straight in to an existing game, not add any new rules, not add any new phases and things, I'm all up for that. Just more variety, more different things and different setup options. But I really dislike, and this is happening more and more often, expansions coming out, those expansions changing the core rules, being difficult to sort through, especially if things are modular. And if you introduce more than one module, that will change another rule and it will change the way things interact. For me, that becomes almost work to me. I hate sorting through it all. It makes it more difficult to relearn the game and get it back to the table. So I'm actually very cautious about trying any expansions now, because what I found is that it's making it more difficult for me to get these games back to the table, which is ultimately what I want to do. I want to play my favourite games, and if I'm going to buy an expansion, it's going to be to my favourite games, but it's going to make it more difficult to play my favourite games. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. Keith has asked, are there any common features that keep a game from being enjoyable to me? Yes, I suppose. I tend to like Eurogames, so a lot of Ameritrashy mechanisms I don't like. Things like top decking I don't like. Things like Roll to Resolve, I just completely steer away from. Games that are too long, or I suppose not too long, games that have the wrong balance of depth and the time it takes. You know, there's nothing worse than a simple game taking too long. I don't mind games being long, but as long as the gameplay has enough, you know, richness to warrant that. Also convolution, things where there's just too many things going on and lots of things could have been cut out from the game. And also games that that don't have any depth at all, any decision space. Games that I feel like I'm on autopilot with. Hence why I don't enjoy a lot of gateway games, because I feel like I'm just going through the motions and the game is playing me rather than me playing the game. He's also asked what games on my shelf haven't I played for a long time and why do I keep them? So there's a ton of games that I've had on my shelf that I've not played for ages, and it's usually due to player count restrictions. For example, games like The Resistance Avalon, games like Tifa Tashin, Decrypto. These are all games that are best at higher player counts, and I very rarely get more than 3 players to the games table. So naturally that makes those games difficult to play. But there's been other games as well that for some reason we just haven't got back to the table for a while. Games like Museum we've had on the shelf for ages, and even had the new big box stuff delivered, and we've not played it since. So we really need to make an effort to play these games that have been neglected, but we're always moving stuff, you know, moving on to the next thing. And of course I've got a channel, I need to put out new content, I need to review new games, and it makes it difficult for some games to get played. Till has asked, what makes a game scale well or not? Tons of different things. Downtime, you know, you don't want to be waiting forever between your own turns. Games that become either too tight or too loose, depending on the player count. You know, a lot of worker placement games aren't as good when when the player count is so low, because you can go wherever you want without really stepping on each other's toes. And the same applies to being too tight. You know, you don't want having no options because everybody has absorbed all the spots on the board. Area control games generally don't work well at lower player counts. You like to have more people to fight over. And another big factor is games that don't scale well for me when it comes to higher player counts are games that become too chaotic. So it becomes very difficult to plan ahead because the game state has changed so much between your last turn and your new turn. And also things like dummy players, like Autobots, these kind of things that will represent and proxy other players. Things like that being too fiddly really does hamper a game scaling well for me. And there's some examples I've given here for bad examples, like Grand Austria Hotel. Because of the snaking turn order, it makes it not as good, but the expansion has fixed that. But I'm just giving an example. El Grande, one of my favourite games, but not very good at 2 or 3, well, 3 players. 5 Tribes, far too chaotic at higher player counts. Game changes too much. And some good examples are things like Concordia, Ra, Samurai, 7 Wonders. These are all games where no matter what player count you play at, you're getting the full experience and it still feels just as fun. So yeah, those are some examples there. He's also asked, what are the most interesting forms of direct and indirect interaction? So I actually love interactive games, but when it's not destructive. So, what you do affects the other players, but you're not tearing down what they've built. So things like Hansa Teutonica, you're blocking each other. Concordia, where if you're helping yourself, you're sometimes helping other people. Or if you're too slow, you have to pay more. Tower of Babel was a good one. A nice kind of card game where you can reject players' offers and give them points. Barrage, great interaction there where you're cutting people off, trying to siphon off their water supply. El Grande, of course, tons of great interaction, constantly manipulating the board state. Babylonia, the sense of urgency. Things like Keyflower, where you're exchanging your resources passively. Just tons of great Euro interaction there without being too in your face, being too cutthroat, but not necessarily being a Care Bear either. So those are the kind of interactive games that I personally enjoy. Even another one that sprang to mind was Brass, where you can use each other's resources. Tiller's also asked, what are my top 3 smart small box card games with depth? And he's specifically asked me to exclude Arboretum and Hanamakoji. So those are 2 great ones. But I've written down a few examples here. Capital Lux, one of the best card games ever made. Extremely clever, very variable. This blackjack mechanism, just a genius game. Mandala, another one I always rave about, a 2-player only game. Condottiere, very confrontational game, but a good one at that. Biblios, we've got For Sale, Scout, Ohanami. These are all fantastic small box card games that have lots going on there. Very enjoyable, but still have good depth. So more than 3 examples there, Till. But thank you very much for the question. On to the last couple now then. I think this is Till still. Yeah, Till has also asked, he says, I describe mechanisms well. Do I spend a lot of time thinking about them? No, I don't. I kind of just turn the camera on and just speak my mind. Board games just make sense to me. It's like, I like looking at all the moving parts, seeing how the gears work, and it just resonates with me. It just comes naturally. Like, some people are good at different things. Like, some people are natural musicians. They can just look at sheet music and look at piece and just play. For me, that was very difficult. I used to be a musician, but now I find it, it didn't come naturally to me at all. I find it very difficult. It's like putting a square peg in a round hole. But board games just sing to me. I just see right through them, and I don't know, I just get them, I suppose. So it just comes naturally, I suppose. So I don't spend too much time thinking about what I'm going to say at all. He's also asked, what is my earliest board game memory? So I've been playing board games since I was very young. Just the natural stuff you'd play when you're little. I remember playing this big dinosaur game that we had in our family home, where I think it was called the Lost Valley of the Dinosaurs, where basically you'd have this big volcano. It would spill all over the board. You had these literal big plastic toys that you'd play with. I love playing that. I also had some other games, such as one called Don't Step on the Croc Dock was one that I had. So lots of family-friendly kids games, and even things like playing stuff at Christmas with my family. So yeah, I've always loved board games, but never really knew about this whole world of modern board games until semi-recently, I suppose. And he's also asked for some party, hidden role, or bluffing game recommendations. There are so many out there. Bluffing games, Skull is a great one. Party games, things like Just One, Wits and Wagers, When I Dream, Insider. They kind of touch all of those categories, really. Good party games, hidden role games, and bluffing games. But yeah, those are some good ones there. And the final question of the episode. Granic AC has asked, do you play any other game genres besides board games? Not really, no. Very rarely I'll play a computer game or a video game, but that's so few and far between. I think the only game I have is Mount and Blade for the Xbox One, and I really like that kind of medieval siege style games. But I have previously been really involved in computer games. When I was at school, I used to play a lot of computer games. Games like Final Fantasy X, games like Broken Sword, Grand Theft Auto. I used to love these things, but I'm not really that interested anymore. I did get into Magic the Gathering quite strongly, but it wasn't quite for me. And the same applies to kind of miniature wargaming, things like Warhammer. I used to spend a lot of time and money on, but that was before I knew about balanced board games. So yeah, it's just a natural progression for me, I suppose. But yeah, I'm very familiar with all these different types of games, but board games is my thing, I suppose. So yeah, that's the only thing I really play at the moment. So that concludes the video. Thank you so much to everybody for submitting all the questions. Again, I want to stress, please put your questions in the comments for this video so that I can answer them next time. Because again, without questions, I cannot continue with this series. But if you have enjoyed it, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel, and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.